Okay, let me just go over briefly what we did this morning in the lab, so because you'll be doing it tomorrow and Thursday. We did a muffin based on the muffin recipe that I had from the lecture. I purposely picked a recipe that had very little sugar, very little fat. So, you know, sugar and fat would tenderize it, would prevent the gluten from stretching. So it's very, very important that you don't overstir the mixture, because if you overstir it, there's a big tendency for you to overstretch the gluten strands to get it tough. But I found out that when students did it, they mix it. So when you mix it, it should still be lumpy, quite lumpy. And some of the students already beat it too much. So most of them had a little bit of the tunnels already, but the ones that I asked them to do it in 2 batches. The first half, beat it, not beat it, just mix it, only until the mixture is well blended. But just a few strokes, really, but it still should be lumpy. And the other would be, I asked if you could do it with additional manipulation. So they beat it until it was just all smooth. And you could really see the tunnels. And it should be quite a bit tougher, a lot tougher. So that's what we had with the muffins. And we had another quick bread, which was banana bread. And in that recipe, I think one turned out quite well, the other one not quite. And they claimed that it's probably because of the bananas not being ripened, because this is the first class of bananas were still quite solid, so we didn't have any liquid. Normally the liquid will come from very, very ripened bananas. So it was so-so. One turned out fine, the other one not quite the way it should be. And we did a regular cake. One turned out fabulously well. It was just like the cake. It's not any cake that you could buy. It's like a cake that you get it from a bakery store. It was so feathery. It was so tender, light, and just practically melted in my mouth when I bit into it. That was a fantastic product. That was because that was the slow creaming process, so you should be able to get that product just the same when you do the cake. The other one was cream puff. Yeah, one cream puff turned out really well. That's a recipe that you kind of have to watch out for. One batch turned out, the other batch did not turn out. So when you put the hot water in with the fat, with the butter, put all the flour in, and you mix it, it should be like a paste. That's what it should be. And then you add 1 egg at a time until they add it, and then you stir. It should still be nice and thick. Don't add all of the eggs at one time. One at a time. Follow instruction really well. And the one that followed instruction really well actually very quickly got finished. And we actually baked it. It turned out very, very well, the cream puff. And there's some ice cream. I bought a carton of ice cream in the freezer. So you go ahead and put ice cream in it if it turned out well, and cut into half. Everybody had half of a cream puff. And we had popover. Popover was easy to do. Just basically mix the two, water basically versus the dried ingredients. You mix the two together, of course, with the eggs, and you bake it at very high temperature because you want to have the initial spout of the steam that's coming out of the steam, as we mentioned before, is the leavening agent. And then you lower it to 350 to kind of like dry it out. And that turned out well in both. So let me see, anything else on this? But yeah, most of the recipes turn out quite well, so I hope they will do the same for you on the Tuesday lab and the Thursday lab. Thank you. Good, and I get to see your name. Yeah, good. Thank you. All right, so today we're on pastries. Okay, pastries include, let's see. Oh, okay, here, that's it. Anybody else needs to sign in? Okay, Includes pie crust when we make pie crust, and next week we'll be making pastries and yeast breads. So I'm going to be covering those two topics. But they're short topics. When I took a look at the calendar, I'm a little bit behind actually, so I really should get started with meat. At least meat class is a long class, so I would like to get that started as a third topic so that I could catch up for next week. So on pastries, pie crust, tarts, turnovers, quiches, all those use pie crust or pastries. So let's talk about that. It's not easy to make. Okay. A lot of people prefer not to, but I'm just going to be telling you about the principles of pastry making, just so that you know why we do this and why we shouldn't do something that would not work. Let me see. Does it work? Yeah, good. We're looking for two characteristics of fine pastry. Basically, it should be flaky. When we say flaky, what does it mean? It's very important for it to be flaky. It's just thin layers of baked dough that's separated by open spaces. So when you chew it up, when you cut it up, you could see layers of pastry. And that's a characteristic of pastry. Pie crust or tarts, okay. Almost any country has some kind of pastry. Even croissant, flaky. You know that it's got layers of baked dough separated by open spaces, or tarts, or typically, as I said, it will be pie. So the second characteristic is that not only should it be flaky, it should also be tender. So you bite into it, it's nice and tender. Okay, nice and tender, light and airy, and it practically breaks up in your mouth. So those are the two characteristics we're looking for. And if you take a look at the recipe, it's very simplistic. You think, oh, anybody could make this. But if you take a good look at it, okay, yeah, 1 cup of sifted flour, 1/3 cup of solid fat. Look, the proportion is 1 to, take a look, 1 to 3 is what it is. Okay? So if you use 3 cups of flour, it will be 1 cup of solid fat. Look how much fat there is. Okay, 1/3 cup of solid fat and 1 cup of sifted flour. By the way, anybody who's using the computer, I wish, it's perfectly okay if you have my PowerPoint presentation there. Otherwise, I feel that you're conversing, so I'd rather not have you. Okay, it's all, I could tell whether you're chatting or, it's distracting to me when I know that you're doing something else. I appreciate it. When I'm here, if you come to my lecture, I wish that you would listen to my lecture. If not, if you prefer to stay at home, it's okay too. It's just so I pretty much know whether you're attentive or not. A lot of times I don't say anything because I just let it go. But sometimes it is. When you're a lecturer, you know when you listen. When you're a lecturer, you know that somebody's not listening to you do something else. Okay, okay, so 1/3 cup of fat is a lot. The reason we use 1/3 cup of fat is because fat, of course, is responsible for tenderness. Fat cuts into these strands of gluten dough. Okay, it cuts into it, so it's responsible for the tenderness also. So we cut the solid fat into the flour, and how do we cut into it? In the lab, we use a pastry cutter. Pastry cutter looks like this. Basically, it has to be solid fat. Whether you use shortening or whether you use butter, you have to have it cut up. This is probably the easiest utensil for us to use. Or you could cut it up. Actually, a lot of people use their fingertips also. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So after you cut the fat into it using the pastry blender or whatever you call it, okay, pastry cutter or pastry blender. Now you sprinkle the cold water to it. Okay. You don't sprinkle a lot. It's only 1 tablespoon at a time. Altogether, no more than 2 or 3 tablespoons of cold water. That's all you put in. Okay. So when you sprinkle cold water into it, 1 tablespoon at a time over the flour fat mixture. Okay. The reason why it has to be cold, must be cold, is that we don't want to melt the fat. The fat should still be solid. Okay. Very important. Water has to be cold. You want to keep the fat still in solid pieces, so that later on you see fat is just going to be mixed in between these gluten strands. And fat is responsible for the tenderness. So only 1 tablespoon at a time until everything is well mixed pretty much. Okay. And then you use a fork to mix it together more lightly and form a dough. If you need additional water, you could always put additional cold water to it. And eventually, you're going to form a dough. And that's the dough that you're going to be able to gather into a ball. Okay. Should not be too sticky, should not be too wet, because you should still want it to be somewhat dry and yet workable. This is the art of pastry making. It's not easy to make. Pastry is probably the most difficult of all the products we've just talked about. It's all by feel. And this is why they said that the only way that you know what's best is by the feel of your fingertips. And we'll talk about that in a little while. Then you roll it out to less than 1/8 of an inch thick. Okay. And that's it. This is a very quick summary of this, and then I'll go into detail next. Okay. Is there any leavening agent here? Can you tell me if there's any leavening agent? We talked about all of the leavening agents, baking powder, baking soda. There's none here. What is the leavening agent here, if there is any? Sifting. Sifting, good. Air. This is why sometimes they ask you to sift the flour, not just once, twice. Sometimes they ask you to sift it 3 times. But generally speaking, sift it once, you think that's enough, but sift it twice will be fine if you want, okay? But it's like collecting air into it, okay? But there's only, they said, well, maybe steam, maybe a little bit from steam, because there are 2 tablespoons of water there, okay? So, but a smaller amount of the leavening effect. Okay. Now, let's show you how to do it. Okay, remember we said that you use 1/3 of a cup, a lot of calories. Do you know how much, do you remember how much fat do we use in making cake? I think, did somebody in my class this morning make the cake? For every 1 cup of flour, do you remember? Or 3 cups of flour, you use only 1/2 cup of fat. But take a look at this. This is 1/3 of the total amount of the flour. So a lot of people didn't know how many calories there are, or whether it's very rich in calories, or whether it's perfectly good to eat. That's why I see people eating croissants over and over again, just like eating bread. A lot of fat there. Each time you see flakes, generally speaking, okay, you've got fat distributed evenly in with gluten strands. So 1/3 of it is fat, is what it is. And when you go to the buffet table, you have a table of all the pastries. Here I am still going over the bread table, just getting a piece of whole wheat bread or something like that. And then the others say, what are you eating? Oh, look at the beautiful pastry here. I don't need it. No need to explain. But now that you've had this class, you know what it is. It's all it's all calories. It's fat. And you know how many, 1 gram of fat is equal to 9, more than twice, more than double the carbohydrate. And this is where all the calories are. But anyway, Where are we? Okay, now, 1/3 of it, of the amount, or sometimes 1/2 of the amount of flour is fat. Something like Napoleon. Can you name a couple of pastries that's very rich? Instead of using 1/3, they use half of it, half of the flour, half of the amount is all of fat. Okay, anything that's flaky like that. Okay. So, if it's that much fat, okay, let's see, what kind of fat do we use? What kind of fat? It has to be pliable. Okay, it has to be, you have to be able to manipulate it. And you want to spread the fat out in between the gluten strands when you bite into it. Okay, this is the taste. Whatever you bite into is a taste, a pastry. The best pastry in the world has probably more fat, and also butter, which has flavor. So what would you use? Which fat is pliable? In the olden days, what is best? Lard. Lard has the best shortening effect. They say when you make a pastry or pie with lard, they said that pastry tastes so good. Okay, but of course we don't want it anymore because of the harmful effect, because it's pork fat. And not only that, it's not recommended. So we no longer, in the olden days, 2 generations ago, or even last generation, they still use lard because, yes, it's pliable, okay, and very rich, of course, and it's also, the fat is also making the pastry very tender also. But without using lard, you can't even buy lard anymore. What would you use? You want it to be pliable. Butter will be good. One thing good about butter is what? I would use butter. I don't want to use a butter that's, of course, too solid, too cold. But then it would not be pliable. You want to wait until it's a little bit soft. Then it's pliable. What's good about butter? Flavor, good. Yeah, it gives you really good flavor. Okay. If you don't want all the calories or all the butter, how about using shortening? This is what they do. Usually butter is more expensive than shortening. So in the store, they would use shortening, which is the same but does not have as much good a flavor as butter. But what I would recommend is either one is good. Why am I saying neither one of them is good for you? One, butter, you're getting saturated fat as long as you know about it. You don't eat a lot of butter anywhere else, that's fine. And you don't eat too much of it, that's fine. Okay? Butter will be okay, and butter gives you the best flavor. Okay? But generally speaking, they use shortening. Okay? It's very pliable. Shortening is made from what? Originally was what? Vegetable oil they started out with. Later on, actually now shortening is a combination of vegetable oil and animal fat. Okay? And the problem with the vegetable oil, when they make it into shortening, they have to do what? They have to add hydrogen to vegetable oil to make a semi-solid. When they add hydrogen to oil, what has it turned it into? What kind of fat? Trans fat. And normally they're all cis and trans. So everybody knows that it's not good for you. But is there any other choice? Unfortunately, no. That's why they're constantly asking, I talked to you about this, any food chemist who's smart, think of something that will not produce trans fat. Wow, he's going to make himself rich, or she's going to make herself rich for that reason. No, they have not. Okay, but they still use shortening or butter. Expensive pastry stores will make it with butter. Okay, cheaper brands will make it from shortening. They can't afford to make it from butter. And if you want to get the benefit of both, just use half and half. That's what I would do. Fat has to be at room temperature, has to be soft enough and pliable enough. You want to stretch it out, basically, is what it is. You want thin sheets of butter in between the dough. Okay. Okay, fat has to be at room temperature. Okay, you don't want it to be too warm, because if it's too warm, you melt it. Once you melt it, it becomes what? It's almost like vegetable oil. It's not going to be pliable. You want to be able to work with it. You want sheets of it. You want sheets of fat, basically, in between the gluten strands. Okay, so it has to be workable, soft enough for a knife to make an indentation. Put a knife in it. Can you make an indentation? If you can, okay, go ahead. And it has to be also, it's also helpful for you to roll it out. If it's too solid, you can't do it. Okay, if it's too watery, the fat is too watery, it's not going to form thin layers of fat the way we want butter to be. Okay, so this is where it's tricky. It's easy to make if you know what you're doing, but it'll be fun for you to see. Now here is someone, I use this to show you, of course, to show you that now you can use regular all-purpose flour, or you could use pastry flour. One of the, of course, pastry flour gives you what? What's the characteristic of pastry flour? Tender or tough? Tender, yeah. Remember, we want it to be in layers, and yet we want it to be tender when you bite into it. So you can use soft wheat if you want, or you could use all-purpose flour, but nothing strong like bread flour. If you use bread flour, it'll be too tough. Okay, so now you sift the flour. Take a look at this. They're lifting the sifter so high up. Did you see? If you lift it high, what's the advantage? More air to go into, because there's no leavening agent other than air. Okay, so higher up you do, the more times you do, the more air you're going to be introducing. And so the more air you could incorporate into the mixture, the better it is. Lift it high was what they suggest. Next, now you sifted the flour. Next, we're going to cut the semi-solid fat into it, whether it's butter or shortening or combination both. It's all up to you. Butter will make it taste better. Okay, it has to be soft enough that you could cut into. So don't put it in the microwave oven. A lot of people say, well, I just soften a little bit. I just defrost a little bit. But a slightly higher temperature would just ruin it, turns it into water. Then you've ruined it. You want it to be pliable, okay? So use a knife or pastry blender. Now a knife, this is a knife. You could cut into it. If you don't have a pastry blender, if you have it, use a pastry blender and cut the fat into the flour until all the butter pieces are broken up into the size of peas, or a little larger than peas would be okay, or short flakes, or hazelnuts, long flakes, or cornmeal, depends. The smaller you cut it into it, like cornmeal, the more tender it is. The larger are the pieces, the flakier it gets, because you spread the fat into thin sheets. So if you cut it too small, it's okay. It's just it's going to be more mealy. That means broken up too much, maybe too tender. Okay, so the best is still to have fat in between here, in between the gluten strands. Continue until it looks fairly, continue doing this until it's fairly well blended in the flour. Now, they suggest you use fingertips, but sometimes in professional classes or academic classes, they tell you to use a fork to mix it, because your fingertips, you have to wash your hands really well, use your fingertips, because it does get cooked before you eat it, but use your clean fingertips, or if you wear gloves, you cannot feel it. The main reason using fingertips is that you could feel, and you could rub the fat now into the flour. What you do is, so as you do it, look at the hand. It's tossing it up, tossing it up. Why is it tossing it up? More air, yes. Introducing more air to it. This is why, for you to be a professional pastry chef, it's not easy. It takes a lot of practice to do it. So you're introducing more air. You want to do it as light and gentle as possible because you're introducing more air. Basically, you throw it into the air a little bit more, collects more air, and it says to lift it high. If you want to incorporate more air, why not? That makes the pastry even lighter if you think you could do it. Okay? So now you've got small pieces of fat mixed in the flour mixture with a little bit of salt. That's all there is. And you see small pieces of the size of either cornmeal will be very small, the size of what? Small nuts or seeds will be okay. What else did they say? To the size of what? Larger than cornmeal will be what? What did it say earlier? Hazelnuts. Yeah. Yeah, so the larger the pieces, you see, the flakier it's going to get. Smaller the pieces, basically, the more tender it's going to be. It's going to be as a final product. Make sure, very important, that the fat is kept as cold as you can, yet not refrigerator cold. You can manipulate it, but it has to be cold. You don't want it to melt it. Okay? And now, okay, there are two questions there I see. Keep the fat as cold as possible. Why? Why do we want to keep the fat as cold as possible? I already answered that for you. So that you could what? Spread it out and get it flaky. You know Napoleon pastry? Typical example. You know Napoleon pastry? The inside is what? Napoleon, oh, so flaky, just see sheets. The inside is what? It's got egg custard, and what else? Okay. In between, or whipping cream, it's a dessert. You actually see sheets of pastry. It's a flakiness. So you want to keep it cold, so you could keep it flaky in between. Okay, let's see. Work with speed. Why? Work with speed. Why? Work at speed because if you work it too much, your hands are warm. Eventually, you're going to melt it. So you have to do it really quick. You don't want the temperature to warm up too much with your hands. Okay. Now, add ice cold water. We only add about 2 tablespoons of water. But those 2 tablespoons of water has to be very cold. Has to be cold. Okay. Why? Why do we add water that's very cold? Yeah, not to melt it. Correct. You want to keep it semi-solid, the butter to be semi-solid. You could only add no more than 2 tablespoons. If you need to add a little bit more, you can, but no, generally speaking, no more than 2 tablespoons. And how do we do it? You sprinkle it. You basically sprinkle the water all over this, okay, so that they get separated. They don't get collected in one lump where the water is dropped. You want to sprinkle all around so it's evenly distributed. Too much water will be in trouble. Okay? Too much water makes the dough too sticky. When it's too much water, when it's sticky, it gets tough. Remember we said that gluten strands develop too much when you put too much water. Water is a villain. Water will make it get too tough. So don't add too much. No more than 2 tablespoons, that's all. But if you add too little water, it's going to be very difficult for you to collect the dough together to roll it out because they keep falling apart, crumbling. So you cannot collect it together to roll it out into pastry dough. So you can't work with it if it's too little. So if I would say only 2 tablespoons, no more than that. Okay. Try, unless if you really need, it has to be very cold water so that the fat is still semi-solid. Now, you could mix it together. Yeah, just grab the whole thing and collect it. So bring the dough together to make it cling together into a dough. Now, this looks pretty good in the photo. In the lab, when you do it, you see small pieces falling out. It's just very easy. In order to get it to this stage, you sometimes have to add a little bit more water because it keeps falling off. You'll see it. But just do the best you can. So you can add a little more water, a little at a time, until you're able to collect it together. Now you've got a dough that you could work with. But you do not want to add too much water. As I said, 2 tablespoons is a guideline. Maybe a drop or 2 or more. But be very careful. Once you overhydrate the dough, what's going to happen? It's going to get tough. Too much water is going to get tough. Okay. So all the flour and fat should be incorporated. So now the pastry dough is collected and the bowl is pretty clean. Okay. And how much can you manipulate this? This is not an yeast dough. This is not a bread dough. You could play with it. Be very careful. The more you play with it, the tougher it's going to get. So you just want to get it collected. And do not over-manipulate the dough. If you over-manipulate the dough, what's going to happen? You're going to extend the gluten strands. It's going to get tough. Okay. As little as you possibly do to keep it tender. So this is why a lot of it's all by experience and by touch. But for you to do it in the lab would be an experience. Whether it turns out the way you want it, everybody could make it, but whether it's flaky and tender, if you could get it to both, it's good enough. And a lot of it's all by experience. So now you got to collect it in one lump of dough. You put it on this. I suppose you could put usually a wooden board would be good. But whatever chopping board you have, you want to make sure you lightly dust it with flour, and use a rolling pin to roll it out. So for pie crust, you roll it out to about 1/8 of an inch thick. That's all it is. So you put the pastry in the pie pan, and you could flute the edge with pie pans in the mealy lab. Flute the edge. And for single crust, all you have to do is just one layer. For an apple pie double crust, you want to do double. Do one and do another one. So you do one, you do one for the bottom layer, fill in the apples. I don't know, maybe think about next week when we do that. Maybe I'll buy some apples for you to do small apple turnover or something, just so that you could taste it. Otherwise, the pie crust tastes so bad without any filling. And then you put the apple filling in or fruit filling in, and then you put the top crust. And you could flute the edge so it looks nice. And but for single crust, you bake the bottom crust first, but you make sure you prick the bottom side, otherwise it blisters. It doesn't look good. And then you put lemon meringue, like a lemon meringue pie, put the lemon filling in it, and then meringue on top. So for the single layer. But for the double layer, will be fruit pie. Typically, would be the fruit pies. You bake the crust at 425 until it's golden brown. Okay, so we will be doing that. Next, let me see. Next. So what is the characteristic? So the final product should be flaky. We know how to get it flaky. We talked about that. Okay. We want to stretch the dough out. In between will be the fat. Okay, solid fat versus liquid fat. Solid fat will give you this flakiness. If you use liquid fat, what would happen if you use vegetable oil? Are you going to be able to stretch the fat out like that? No. If it's oil, it's going to be what? It's going to be crumbly, mealy. Just like baked potato, I said, certain, depending on the potato you're going to use for baked potato. Okay, Idaho potato will get mealy, crumbly. That's what you want. And make mashed potato. And this would be crumbly also if you use oil. No, you never want to use oil. You want the flakiness. Okay. So the amount of water, you don't want too much water. Otherwise, you're going to overdevelop, and it will be too tough, the gluten strands. Okay? And you don't want to mix it too much either. Only handle it enough so you don't overstretch it. It'll be too tough. You want it flaky as well as being tender. Those are the two characteristics, flaky and tender. What do we mean by tenderness? It has to be light. When you bite into it, it has to be light and airy. Like you bite into it, you're feeling the air in between. And it should be easily broken in mouth as you bite into it. So there's a note there at the bottom. The dough must be well mixed also. You see how fussy it is? You can't do this, you cannot do that. You have to come in a happy compromise. And what is that happy compromise? The dough must be well mixed, and yet we do not want to over mix it. If you over mix it, you overdevelop the long gluten strands that would toughen it. Here it is. And yet you have to mix it. So this is why it's difficult. The art of pastry making requires time and energy for you to practice and practice and practice until you get the feel of it. And this is why the best way to practice and get the feel of it is with your bare hands, was what they said. Otherwise, you can't feel it. Okay? So, now, you'd be making biscuits. Biscuits is used, it has a very unusual recipe and methodology. Look, it uses baking powder, ain't it? So it's like a quick bread, and yet it's a pastry method. So it'd be interesting to see how you make biscuit. Typically, the biscuit would be the southern biscuits. The biscuits, not the biscuits. The English says the biscuits are cookies, right? But these biscuits are the Southern American biscuits. They eat it with gravy sometimes. So if you take a look, there's baking powder, flour, milk, salt, and shortening. You use the quick method, and yet you do, it's a combination quick bread method and pastry method. So let's take a look. Heat the oven first, use fork to mix together the flour, bake all the dry ingredients together in one bowl. And now with the dry ingredients in it, with the baking powder, you're cutting the shortening. Cut the shortening, which is, easy to do, using a pastry blender, or sometimes if you want, you could use a fingertip. Make sure you wash your hands so that the mixture looks like coarse crumbs. So now the fat is cut in. You add all of the liquid, like the quick bread, like the muffin method. Add the liquid now, and stir it with a fork until the mixture is moist. So the dough should still be soft and doughy, and you put that mixture on a lightly floured wooden chopping board, and you knead it lightly just to mix it, turning the dough a little bit. Don't knead it too much. It says only 10 strokes. Mix it basically 10 or no more than 15 strokes until it's soft and smooth. And so now you roll it out to about 1/2 inch thick, and you use biscuit-shaped cookie cutter to cut into it. So they all are going to be rounded because you use a round cookie cutter or biscuit cutter, and you put them on the ungreased cookie sheet. You bake it for 10 minutes, and it's really good. Again, when you eat it, it should be flaky. That's a characteristic of that, of the biscuit, the American Southern American biscuit. And it should be flaky, just like the pastries are, and yet it tastes like any quick bread. So it's a combination of both. It should be light and fluffy, tender. So there is already a recipe in the Mealy Lab, so we'll use that next week, not this week. And are there any questions? This is pastry. It's very easy, very fast when I lecture it, and yet it's very difficult to get it right. For it to be flaky, as I said. Anybody would tell you that. This is why they said that very few people actually use, when you make pies, okay, very few people make it from scratch. But of course, if you make a lot of apple pies, it's well worth it. Now, they now sell pastry sheets already made. Have you seen it? And amateurs just use those. So much easier. Never the same as the real pastry. And this is why it is difficult. Okay, any question? If not, the next topic, we'll move on. Let me see. We have one word to finish. I thought I had it. Oops, sorry. I'm sorry. Okay, let me see. I'll go back. Let's see why. Okay, on yeast breads. Yes? Making bread?
Yeah, he said if you want the best product, bake in the summer versus...
Bake bread in the summer?
Yeah.
Well, why don't we let me finish lecturing, and you could tell me. I don't know. Let's rationalize a little bit to see whether it makes sense and why she said that. Okay, yeast breads. It's going to be very difficult for you to make bread from scratch next week. So the only, I think, because it takes too long, if you allow it to rise 2 times. So we might just use the quick method. We do the quick method of making yeast bread. Let's see. Let's talk about it first. Making good yeast bread takes time. And the well-known bakeries actually allow yeast breads to rise not only once or twice, okay, they allow it to rise 3 times even, using bread flour. Okay, so all of a sudden now we're changing gear. All along, I told you that we don't want to manipulate any kind of dough because you overstretch it. Once you overstretch it, it's going to get tough. Remember, I said that consistently. All of a sudden, we're going to change gear. We said, I'm going to tell you, with yeast bread, you do have to manipulate. You do have to stretch it. The more you knead it, the better it is. And I'll tell you why. Let's start with yeast alone. Yeast is a living organism. It's a living thing. One cell living fungus. And that's the leavening agent for a change. You have to have yeast, okay, for it to rise. So what it is, it's a fermentation process. Yeast can go through a fermentation process. What it is that yeast will convert glucose, a little bit of sugar, glucose, to water plus alcohol plus carbon dioxide. So take a look at this formula again. Yeast converts glucose to water, ethyl alcohol, and carbon dioxide. So water is water, turns it into water, but which of these is a leavening agent? Yeah, carbon dioxide. Thank you. Carbon dioxide that's produced by yeast. And also there's another product there. What is it? Yeah, ethyl alcohol. Actually, it's the same process that we use for making wine. Because on the surface of grapes, you find natural yeast. And it's the work of the yeast that turns sugar to ethyl alcohol. It's the same thing. But here we just use, it's a yeast that turns into a little bit of alcohol, and that's why the aroma is fantastic. Have you been to any shopping mall and you're walking down the shopping mall and all of a sudden you said to yourself, there's a bakery down there, I could smell it. They always do that. They always do the last minute baking on site. They want you to smell it. The smell is very fragrant. Ethyl alcohol smell all the way down the shopping mall to tell you, come on in. I've got freshly made bread. Okay, so this is a special aroma that attracts a lot of people. Even when you have guests in the house, they know you're making fresh bread. Okay, it's the same, as I said, it's the same fermentation process as making wine from grapes. And the yeast needs a lukewarm temperature, which is about 90 to 110. Usually we take the water temperature to about 120. By the time you use it, pour it into a container where you have yeast, it lowers, it gets cooler anyway. So you take it to 120, 130, and by the time you use it, it gets cooled down to 90 to 110, which is perfect. But if you take it to 140, the yeast will die. Don't take it to 140 because there's no more effect anymore. The yeast cannot do the job, cannot give you the carbon dioxide anymore. Okay, yeah. Max, did you have a question?
So when you make the bread, you're killing the yeast, right?
Well, eventually, yeah.
But then I thought that...
But during the process, you still smell it. It's a combination of few aromas, actually. Of course, you're going to kill the yeast, but you still have ethyl alcohol there.
So my question is, I thought that people took, in the old days, they would take a piece of the bread and use it for a starter for the new bread.
Oh, you're talking about sourdough?
Yeah.
Yeah, it depends on what stage they... see, I'm not sure exactly how sourdough starter works. You have to keep it alive for a while, and then you use it, and you keep it alive, and you use it again. You could use it for, they said, for generations. I don't know how true it is.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay, so it's not using the actual bread, taking a piece of
No, it's a starter. Yeah. I've used it. Somebody gave it to me, and I used it for a couple of times. And later on, I was a little worried because it looks funny. I was worried that it might be bad, and it might be harmful to anybody who eats it. But that, you could, once you start it, you could develop it, and you could keep it, just like you raising babies. You know, keep them healthy, and could use it again. Yeah. Okay. There are several types of yeast. We've always used the regular active dry yeast, which is a traditional yeast that we use. And, but then it requires at least 2 risings, 2 proofings, and it takes time. And we would never be able to do it in the lab because of the time it takes. So now, even most families now use instant yeast. Ever since this got discovered, the instant yeast, known, sometimes it's called, look on the label, by the way. It says fast rising or rapid rise or quick rise, or they said bread machine. Bread machine's always fast, the instant yeast, because bread machine, cannot do the double proofing. So any of these will shorten your rising time, shorten the amount of time you have to take for making bread. So it only uses one rising. So this is what it looks like. Originally, at the very top, those are the active dry yeast. You used to buy them in, wherever the refrigerated items are. But again, if you have time, they still, because it takes 2 proofings, the bread will be better. The more time, in fact, the bread would be, the more proofings you go through, the better it is what it is. It dissolves in warm water, okay? I talked about that. And you add it to the ingredients. It takes 2 rises or 2 proofings. Or the compressed yeast. You don't see the compressed yeast very much because they use it more commercially now, the compressed yeast right here. Okay? Solid block. It's very dependable, but the shelf life is short. But they rather have that in the bakeries because they know they can rely on the product. And it works for them very well. But for home, we can't keep them, You want to be able to use again next month or whatever. So we don't see the second category very much. But the third category is what we now use a lot because we cannot stand the amount of time it takes for any product to go through 2 risings. So we could skip 1 rise, the first rise. We could shape the loaf right away after we need it. And so it is what we're going to be doing, the rapid rise yeast, with the recipes we're going to be doing next week. Probably, I was thinking, we'll probably do pizza, and then I asked for cheese. The cheese is still there in the refrigerator, and we're going to have some tomato sauce, something that you could put in your stomach, for a small lunch, whatever. So next week, we'll do that. What kind of flour do we use? What kind of flour do we use for making bread? Bread flour. The reason why bread flour is used, bread flour comes from what? Flour with more of what? With more protein, yes. So it has more gluten for this elasticity that we need. And one reason why are we not worried about gluten development, that it might be tough? Okay, one reason is right there. I've given you in italics right here. Okay, the fermentation process would weaken the gluten strands. So all along, I said, don't stretch it too much, don't work it too much, because it's going to get tough. You're going to stretch the gluten strands, which are tough. Remember, the gluten strands are tough. Now I'm going to ask you to knead it, to work with it, because the fermentation process will soften it, will weaken the gluten. So it needs more manipulation. The more you knead, the stronger, the better will be the proofing. The better will be the volume, and that's what we're looking for. I'm sure I'm going to ask you this, because all of a sudden, I'm switching gear. I'm asking you to manipulate it, to work with it, to knead it. When you knead it with this part of your palm and really stretch it, really stretch it. The more you stretch, the more you work with it, okay, the better is the volume of the bread for the first time. It's mainly because of this, I'm repeating it again, fermentation process that weakens the gluten. Okay? And what is the fermentation process? I already gave it to you before, and it's right here. Okay? We use yeast, need some sugar. It has to have some sugar. Now, with the winemaking, there's already sugar there, right? The grapes all right, they give you sugar. But here you have to add a little bit of sugar. Sometimes, even if you don't have sugar, flour itself can be broken down to allow it to have some sugar. But if you add some sugar, it will be a good starter for it to start the fermentation process. So add a little bit of sugar for that particular purpose. And then you get ethyl alcohol, carbon dioxide, and water. So where is the leavening agent here? Carbon dioxide, yeah. From what? What gives fermentation process? From what? From yeast. You have to put yeast in it. So on an exam, I won't give you yeast and carbon dioxide too, because they both would be correct, right? So I would say fermentation, I would say yeast, something about, so that it'd be very clarified. You know exactly what yeast and carbon dioxide somehow together. I'll group the two together, or I'll have it in such a way that there's no other answer. So what is the leavening agent in yeast bread? Carbon dioxide from yeast. And you have to you have to give yeast to it. Okay, what kind of flour do you use? Bread flour. Why do you use bread flour for a change? Because it's high in gluten. You need strong gluten strands here. And why? Because the fermentation process would weaken the gluten strands. And this is why. It's a fermentation process that will weaken it. Just collapse, basically, if you don't need it. The more you need it, the more you strengthen it. And that's why. And this is why, professionally, the bread companies usually do proofing, not just once, not just twice. They do it 3 times. But they use a bread flour that has so much protein that will accommodate that. The more proofing, the more you do, the better it is. And that's why, especially as you see the white, flour, the bread, okay, it is so soft. It's all airy. You're biting into it. Sometimes it's like sponge, So, which is not good either. I like the more solid bread, whatever, but it's your preference. But depends on what they make, right? If they make white bread, they probably have to do this proofing process probably 3 times, okay? Now, so we talked about that, the fermentation process that weakens it. That's why I put it in italics. Sugar. Add a little bit of sugar to start the fermentation process, okay? And we add a little bit of fat, because if you add a little bit of fat, it makes it a lot easier for you to handle the dough. It's easier for you to manipulate it. Okay. Now, usually they ask you to add a little bit of salt. Salt in everything actually enhances the flavor. Okay. Adds for flavor, and also it retards. It works against fermentation. So it kind of like balances it out. So it would not allow the fermentation to go haywire. It holds it back a little bit. So salt is helpful to retard the fermentation process to make it more balanced. Hold on. Don't go so fast. I'm going to hold you back a little bit. Okay? And the dough, generally speaking, is allowed to rise until at least double. It takes an hour and a half just to allow it to rise once. In the Vista room, they have a proofer machine. You could put in the proofer. The temperature is just perfect for it to rise. And sometimes you don't know what the temperature should be. In the mealy lab, there's no such thing. So you have to rely on maybe a stove area where it's a little bit warmer for it to rise. But they allowed to rise until at least double. If this is the dough, it allowed at least double or triple. So when it has doubled or tripled, then you basically punch it down. And strong flours, such as bread flour, would allow you to even to go through one more proofing if you need to. So strong gluten flour would be allowed, can be allowed, to rise more times, sometimes more than twice. And it's a carbon dioxide that we're looking for to give the leavening. It's a leavening agent that causes the dough to expand or to rise. And the ethyl alcohol is volatile, and this is why it smells. You said, well, what is the smell? It's not the same. When you bake bread, the smell of baked bread is not the same as baking quick breads. It's mainly because it's this process. A little bit of ethyl alcohol smell. Okay. So this is a recipe. Okay. 6 cups of bread flour. And you don't have to remember this. I won't ask you this because there are too many ingredients there. And 1 envelope of active dry yeast, 1 tablespoon sugar, 2 cups of very warm water, about 120. Okay, some salt, and a little bit of softened butter to help with manipulation of the dough. Now this, if I remember correctly, I got this from, actually the recipe from the Vistarum bread, because they make, the chef used to come in very early in the morning, like 6 o'clock or 5:30, and he would be the one, they actually measured all of the dry ingredients in the mixing bowl already, the mixer, whole bar mixer. So early in the morning, he was the one who started making the bread early in the morning, and it takes that long before they were able to serve it at noon. So gather all the ingredients, flour the breadboard, and grease the pan. But of course, for us, you could use a wire whisk, but for large quantity like the Vistarum, they use actually the electric mixer, the large Hobart mixer. So with the wire whisk, you mix all of the dry ingredients, sugar, salt, and the rapid yeast. They use rapid yeast because he said even for him, if he used a regular yeast, he said he sometimes could not get bread out at noon. And in the saucepan, you bring the liquids and a little bit of fat there to 100, remember I said 120 or 130, until very small bubbles form. Okay, and then you cool it. It's easier to do that, cool it to 110. Now you add the warm liquid in with the flour mixture. Very easy to do, actually. It's just a waiting time that takes long. So you combine the flour with it and use the electric mixer for about 2 minutes. That's what they did in the visitor room. Now for us, we'll be using the wooden spoon to mix it, to form a soft dough. If it's not enough flour, you could always add more flour to get the feel of a bread dough. And be careful not to use too much. It still should be a soft dough, but not a dry dough. Okay. Now you put it out on a floured breadboard. You knead it until it's knead. Now you work with it. Knead it until it's smooth and elastic. Because you need it, because you want to develop, because the fermentation process weakens it. You've got to work on it. This is very unusual, just the opposite of all the other baked products we talked about. So you have to knead it, you have to work with it. Okay? And so in the Mealy lab, in the Vista room, they had a dough hook. Remember we had 2 attachments? The first one was what? That I showed you was a wire whisk. Wire whip, was for beating what? Egg whites or cream, right? The wire one. You could beat it really quickly to get it to foam. And then the flat beater, remember we saw the flat beater? That's the one that you actually combine ingredients together to form a dough. Okay? And then the last one is a dough hook. Did you see the dough hook? That's for kneading. So in the visitor room, they use that dough hook. And I think we have dough hook there too in the Mealy lab, do we? So you don't have to knead it, you could use a dough hook. The dough hook would be your hand mixing it, kneading it, work with it. Kneading is very, very important for the development of strong, elastic gluten strands because it's constantly being weakened by the what? By the fermentation process. So you want to develop it. Okay, so now, after you kneaded it, you cover it lightly with a plastic wrap. You don't want to dry it out. So you cover it and put it in a grease bowl and allow it in a warm place. Put it in a warm place until it double in size. Sometimes don't allow it to triple. Actually, double is going to, double and a half, 2.5, but don't allow it to triple or 4 times. When it's overdeveloped, it's too much. It won't come back up again. You want it still to be elastic. Okay, so allow it to double. If you have very strong flour, bread flour, yes, you could triple right away. But normally we have regular bread flour. Twice it's double is all we need. So now you take the dough and you shape it into a loaf or shape it into dinner rolls. You could do that. And you could cover again to allow it to rise once more. Okay. So in the Vistum, they used to serve the bread. Okay. So allow in the draft-free place to allow it to double in size. Don't put it in the oven until it is double in size. Because if we put it in the oven too early, it's not going to give you the volume. Make sure it's double in size, whatever you had, because you worked it out, you punched it down already. So it's already flat. So now you want it to double. And then now you bake it, and you can smell it right away. You know it's ready. So we'll see what we could do next week to give you a sample of yeast bread. And by the way, initially, you want to make sure a baking dough, you need this, what they call the initial proofing. Okay, is this. It's pretty high in temperature. You need that high temperature, 400 to 425, for that initial proofing for it to rise in the volume. Okay, and you could remove it from the pan once it's ready, brush it with melted butter or whatever, cool it before you cut it. Oh, this is it. So it's not difficult, but you just have to wait until it's double. And you knead it again, it's double. Okay. And then you put it in the pan ready. If it's dinner roll or whatever it is, because you've worked with it, it has already collapsed. You have to wait until it's doubled again before you put it in the oven. And then you're bound to have good enough a product that you could taste. But everything, it takes time to make. And and if you just practice the second time, you just get a better feel of it. Everything's by hand, by touch. Okay, are there any questions about yeast bread? And I thought that we would have, do you want to take a short rest? Because I like to start, otherwise I'm going to be behind on meats. You want to stretch for 5 minutes, it's a long time. And I could sit down for 5 minutes and I could teach a small portion of the meat. Otherwise, I may not have time to finish it all. I like to, because timing, all of a sudden I realize it's 2 short classes. I could start on meat and I could get done. By the way, there will be, if I'm correct, there will only be 1 online quiz. I combined the 2 because 2 short classes today on pastry and yeast bread. I think I combined them already. I'll take a good look at it. So it's only 1 online quiz, I think. I will announce it. I'll take a good look at it to see whether it's ready to go. Okay? And what else was I going to say? Oh, next week, a mealy lab will be doing the yeast bread and also the pastry. That's next week. And next week for my lecture, I will finish meat. And poultry and fish will be short classes because I'm supposed to be done next week. Because the following week is going to be a lab on meat, and that will be the last mealy lab. Did you know we're coming to the end of the semester? Because there will be a lab for cleaning, get cleaned up, and in the lab, we all have to take turns how to clean. So, and then online quiz There will be an online quiz on meats, online quiz, I think a combination of poultry and fish, and then that will be it. We have a few other topics we have to teach, but no more online quizzes because you'll be busy finishing up the semester. Students are always, at the end of the semester, worried about your papers and all that. Okay, class. Now we're on the topic of meats. Just a minute, I need to.
I'm telling you, most people that work pepper spray didn't know
Do we have any? Yeah, maybe if I have any more students, at least I don't get the distraction. Okay, we're going to come back to class again. So on meats. It's actually a pretty complicated, wherever I think that you need to back off a little bit or not to have to dwell on it for too long, because I won't ask you some of the physiological questions from meats, I will tell you so. So I'm going to stress mainly from the cooking point of view, principles of preparation. So meats. We spend the most amount of money on meats. And this is why the class is also longer for us to cover the topic. Because we spend so much money on meats, we want to make sure that the quality of the meat that we buy is good, that it actually needs our purpose, that we're not wasting our money and buy the wrong cut for the wrong purpose, and that we know how to store and cook meats the best possible way according to the cuts. And if you take a look at the structure of meat, basically the composition of meats basically consists of the following. It, of course, has some water. It has muscle cells, muscle fibers. Okay. It has connective tissue. We talk about that. It has fat. We talk about that. And also, of course, it has bones for support. And I'm going to talk about a single muscle. A single muscle is made of many, many bundles of muscle cells or muscle fibers. So if I'm just going to draw 3 of them, 4, 5. These are all muscle fibers. And they're all bound together or held together by connective tissue. And that's the part that's tough, the connective tissue. Some of the connective tissue is soft enough you could easily chew, but some requires moist heat cooking. So this is where I'm going to be stressing. Okay? And then with all of these connective tissue binding the muscle cells together, they are attached to the bones with tendons and ligaments, often cannot even be softened by cooking. So now I'm going to show you this. I'm not going to test you on this, but I thought this might be helpful to demonstrate, to show you what the meat or the muscle structure looks like. Remember I said each one of these is a muscle fiber, and they wrapped around with connective tissue. And there are many, many of these muscle fibers held together by more connective tissues. And one bundle of this is one bundle, is tied together with connective tissue again, with another bundle, with another bundle, another bundle. They are all held together and tied again with additional connective tissue that will be tougher as you go down the line. And this is even tougher, the tendon. Okay? And then it's tied to the bone. So as I said, you don't need to know names. I'm not going to never ask you about the endomyosin or epimyosin, whatever. We just need to know the muscle fiber and the connective tissue and how we're going to cook to soften. Okay, let's see. Oh, I didn't. Okay. So looking at that, we know that the thickness of the muscle cells, okay, and the length of the muscle cells, or the whole bundle of muscles are related to the tenderness as far as the location of that muscle cell, where it is, which part of the animal it's located, okay, whether it can be softened or whether it's hard and can never be softened, depends on where it is. Generally speaking, the smaller fibers, muscle fibers, usually gives very fine grain that's easy to cook, easy to soften, okay, such as like fish. Whereas in meats, they're often in mammals, they are the long bundles of fibers that's more difficult to soften unless if you use moist heat cooking method. So with fish, fibers are short, it's separated by very thin sheets of connective tissue, and we don't need to overcook. In fact, we never want to overcook. So we'd go through, first of all, on meats, and then next week, finishing it off on poultry and fish, how they differ. And I'm not going to cover this too much. Basically, nothing fancy here. I just want to mention give you 1 or 2 points. Let me see. I think there's yeah. Okay, if you take a look at the beef tenderloins, you can see those sheets of connective tissue, okay, is what I was referring to. Whereas the muscle that I was trying to demonstrate is right there. So connective tissue, the reason why it's called connective tissue is that it has a connecting function. It connects the tissue to the bone and hold it in place. So this is why connective tissue is so important in holding the muscle cells together and tie it to the bones. Okay. And it also acts as the glue that glues the muscle cells together. So it consists of very complex, very complicated polysaccharides also. Some of them are more fibrous, and some of them are less fibrous and more tender. Okay. So the fibrous connective tissue basically are found in the tendons or the ligaments that's tied to the bones. And so when it comes to poultry and fish, the connective tissue basically is very different, tender and soft. But of course, they all increase with age. The older it is, the tougher is the connective tissue. So that's all you need to know, connective tissue and the muscle cells and their function and why they're there, okay, and the location. The closer they are to the bones, the harder it is for you to cook it to softness. Now let's take a look at the protein that's in the connective tissue. First of all, what you find mostly, the most important protein, most of it is in the form of collagen. I don't know whether you know collagen, okay? Shoulders, where the animal moves, the legs, where they walk, okay? They all have collagen, more collagen in the moving part, okay? But the part that moves will be tougher. The part where the animal moves will be tougher. Of course, they need to give them strength. Okay. So any part where the animal moves, the shoulders, the legs, the arms, okay, always have tougher collagen and requires moist heat for cooking. So the moist heat is used to hydrolyze, to soften the collagen. Do you know, if you cook collagen, it gets softened to gelatin. Did you know? Have you cooked a tough piece of meat in water, trying to make soup out of it? What do you see? after you cook it at low heat for about 2 hours, making soup, maybe beef broth or chicken broth. What do you see in the broth? Does it get thickened sometimes? Yeah. What is it? Okay. It's gelatin. Collagen requires moist heat, requires water to hydrolyze or soften to gelatin. Okay. So anywhere where the muscle is exercised, or sometimes older animal because they live longer, so their meat is tougher, of course, and their collagen is also tougher. So any high collagen content in older animals or exercise muscles where they move a lot, okay, you need to use moist heat cooking, water, and slow heat, water, slow heat, to dissolve the collagen or to change the collagen to what? To gelatin. To gelatin, that's why you see gelatin. That's why when you make broth, or when you make stock, remember we talked about that? It actually, after a while, you see it's gelatin. You know, it actually, they come together. So finally, when you shrink together, I saw the chef putting that whole pot of very concentrated stock. Sometimes they put it in the freezer, sometimes they put it in the refrigerator. It's all gel, actually, and it's gelatin. And that's how they make gelatin. So is gelatin a vegetarian product or animal product, which is always mistaken? You know Knox gelatin, the brand Knox, packages of gelatin. You make Jell-O from it. Okay, it's not take a look at the label. Okay, it's animal product. So pure vegetarian will be shocked. I've been eating gelatin all along, vegetarian. Then where did they get it? From collagen. Okay, animal product. Just thought I'd mention to you if you're interested. Okay. Sometimes, so the high collagen content and all come from exercise animal. That's why when you make broth from it, it's thick. It has gelatin in it. But the low collagen content comes from fish, poultry, less exercise muscles. We're like at the back of the cow. Okay, it has back of any cow. Okay, has less collagen because it doesn't get moved. Whereas in the legs, shoulders, arms, they move, so more collagen. A low collagen content requires a dry heat cooking. I already introduced this. That's why with steak always comes from the back of the animal, where it's not exercised very much. It has marbling, it has fat streaks, but it does not have much collagen. So you do not need water to cook. If you use water to cook, you've ruined a piece of steak. Use dry heat, grill it, or what? Broil underneath the heat, or what? Grill it. Never use water, you ruin it. Okay? Because there's no collagen. We'll talk more about it later. The other is elastin. Elastin is a very rubbery, very tough part that's connected to the bones. That's it. That's very tough. Sometimes it's impossible. Let me see. Did I have another? Yeah. Does not soften with heating. So no matter how well you cook it, generally speaking, the butcher won't give it to you. They just throw it away because you can't soften it. The part that's close to the bones. It's called elastin. Okay. So as I mentioned, meat with more collagen or connective tissue, any meat with more collagen would use moist, long, slow heat cooking. You could cook it for 3 hours until it softens. And by then, you could see actually the gelatin there. It's nice and moist. It's not fat, it's gelatin. but often there would be fat there that's mixed in there. But if you skim off the fat, if you're careful with it, it's mostly gelatin. So, look, collagen comes from the animal, okay? If you add heat to it, apply moisture to it, water to it, and you cook it over a long period of time, it gives you very nice gelatin, tender, short ribs of beef. Wow, you bite into it. It tastes wonderful. Yeah, there might be fat there too. You say, oh yeah, but it's a gelatin that's so tender. But if you use elastin, then no matter how long you cook it, it's still rubbery and tough. So as I said, this is why basically the butcher would remove it. Meat with less collagen, any part, the back part, the front part, where the animal does not move very much. Okay, use short, dry heat, broiling. Okay, so tender cuts of meat, very expensive cuts of meat, you do that. Fish and poultry, you do that. That's what fish. Basically, you use dry heat. You could pan fry. Okay, you could fry it, but cook it into just a very short time. That's all you need. Okay. Fish, shellfish, any of the weaker muscles in younger animals also. The older is the animal, the tougher it would be. The longer it would take for you to soften it. So that's where the differences are. And let's take a look at any questions thus far about collagen, connective tissue. Okay? So now let's take a look at marbling. Another aspect of quality of meat when we spend large sum of money to buy is the marbling. What is marbling in muscle? Take a look at these 3 pieces of steak. This is moderately abundant, this is moderate, and this is slight. This doesn't have a lot of streaks, right? This has some, this has a lot. What are these streaks? Fat. Streaks of fat. So the more expensive steak, the more tender. Did you know the marbling is really fat that's deposited inside the muscle? These are white streaks or drops of fat. However, people like it because they found that if you blindfold somebody, you give them 2 pieces of meat, and a piece of meat that has marbling, they'll tell you that it's juicier, that it's more flavorful, and it's more tender. Is it really? I don't know. But it's perceived. That's why the word perceived. Mainly because fat adds flavor. A lot of good flavor actually gets absorbed by the fat. So fat contributes to the flavor. They think it's more flavorful. They think it's more juicy. Could be the fat that you're tasting, but you think it's juicy. And you think it's more tender too. So these are only perceived qualifications of a piece of meat that could sell you practically the double the price. And so this is why research always says that, let me see, is there another line? No. Okay, that marbling, I'll read it. Marbling has a very positive effect on the eating quality of loin steaks, loin cuts. And which part of the carcass you think would have more marbling, more fat? Would it be in areas where the animal moved more? Or would it be in areas where animal does not move very much? Does not move very much. That's where fat is collected. Okay, where the animal does not move very much, fat is collected. And if you overfeed an animal, that animal will be collecting a lot of this. Let me see, would I have a photo? Oh, yeah, I do. Okay, I got to show you this. Look at this. This is Kobe beef. My husband and I went to Japan a few years ago. You know, Kobe beef sells very well worldwide. Do you know how much you have to pay for a piece of Kobe beef? This is something like 3 times, 4 times, even 5 times. Okay, so when we went to Japan, we went to various cities. We had a wonderful time, by the way, in Japan. And they said, well, you're not going to go anywhere, the tour guide said, until you've had a piece of Kobe beef, what we're known for in Tokyo. So we all went there, and I knew Kobe beef would be fatty. But when we sat down, all took our seats at the restaurant to eat, the minute I look at it, I tell you, it's worse than this. I saw more white streaks of fat than the meat itself. It just turned me off immediately. I refused to eat it, and I ordered something else. I said, I'm sorry, I came here for Kobe beef. I didn't realize. I couldn't say, I didn't realize this is bad. I didn't realize there's so much fat. And as I said, they sell very well because the fat, the marbling, is what gives the guests the perceived tenderness, juiciness, and flavor. Okay. Do you know how they raise the Kobe beef to get so much fat? Do you know if they allow them to roam around? Do they? Are they allowed to roam around outside in pasture? No. They were all bound indoor. It's actually pathetic, but they treat them very well. They said that they feed them with what? They even give them beer, good grains, and they're not allowed to move. That's sad. But they treat them very well. They even play music. They said they love classical music. And they massage them. They treat them very, very well. They're not allowed to walk because this is what they want to produce. But now, with the current knowledge of all that fat could do to one's health, I don't know whether there's a different concept anymore of Kobe beef. But the problem, the main issue is that it is so expensive to eat Kobe beef. How many people could actually afford to eat it? No, very few. This is the issue. When you see the Japanese being so so thin, okay, do they really eat that? I asked, did you eat Kobe beef? Oh no, if they eat it, it would just be a very thin slice, barely like half of a slice, or less than half of an ounce on what? Sukiyaki. You know, they put it on top, and this is what they eat. So they really don't eat. But when the Americans eat the beef, they'll eat the whole piece. This is when, to me, will be really detrimental. But anyway, Kobe beef, they treat their cows like saints, as I said, like human. Music, they said, what else? But anyway, unbelievable. Massage and all that. So they think that they're not mistreated to put them indoor, but they don't get to exercise. But this is talking about marbling. This is the effect. 50%, sometimes 80%. Yeah, that's what I thought I saw. 80, close to 80%. It's practically all white. Now, this is surface fat. To me, surface fat is okay. It doesn't go into the muscle. So generally speaking, the butcher will trim off. Yet they could sell them on the basis of yield grades. What is the yield on meat? So this, of course, would be a much lower yield because look at all the surface fat. This has very little surface fat. That would be yield 1. That means most of it is edible. Whereas this, you have to trim it off. There is some marbling here, but most of it is surface fat. So the yield grades will be the amount of lean muscle, lean meat in relationship to fat. And generally speaking, in the United States, you don't want to buy a piece of meat that has this much surface fat. So they usually trim it off. You don't even see it. But when they buy the carcass, half a carcass, a whole carcass, that's what makes a difference, because once they trim it off, you've lost the weight, right? So I just, at this point, I thought I would mention to you about, let me see, no, okay, let's answer some of these questions. When the animal has more connective tissue, what does it mean? When the meat that we eat has more connective tissue, what does it mean? Where is it coming from? It's coming from the carcass or the animal where what? More connected tissue, where they move around a lot, yeah, where they walk around. The shoulder, the legs, hind legs, front legs, okay, maybe even tail and shoulder, neck, all this, okay, would have more connective tissue. Okay, so it would require what? What kind of cooking? Moist heat cooking, slow cooking, until the connective tissue actually softens, and it could get gelatinized. The gelatin tastes really good. All right, and also an older animal, which one would have more connective tissue? An older animal or a younger animal? Older animal, yeah. So an older animal would have more connective tissue. Which animal would have more marbling? Where in the animal, rather, would have more marbling, more fat? Where would a piece of meat have more marbling and they could sell for more higher price?
Where it doesn't move.
Where the animal does not move, the belly or the back, because it doesn't move. Okay, and that's where the best steaks, T-bone steak, okay, some of the best steaks are coming from. But it has more marbling, okay, and that's what the consumers want, because it gives us the perceived juiciness and tenderness that we want, and that's why they could demand high prices. Basically, more collagen will be more slow, moist heat cooking. All right? Wait, okay. Now, when you visit, I remember when I taught a class a long time ago, all the courses, I've been here for so long. I remember we even had food purchasing, quantity food production, all kinds. But when I taught quantity food purchasing, I took students, my class, to a meat purveyor, meat factory. It was very interesting. Okay. When we got there, we saw that they demonstrated what they meant by meat color. And if you cut, they cut the carcass open to show the meat. As they cut it up, we saw that the color pigment was actually purplish color, not deep red, not bright red. It's purple color, purple red, and dark purple red. But once they cut it up, immediately it becomes bright red. Inside we could see purple red. Once that piece of meat gets exposed to oxygen, it becomes oxygenated and becomes bright red. It's actually oxygenated myoglobin is what it is. I don't need to have you know the name. So this is why when you go to the grocery store, when they sell steak, they love to expose the steak with bright red color and a saran wrap over it. That's the way they sell, because the consumers will grab the reddest piece of meat, okay, because you don't see the purple color. The purple is inside. Once it's exposed to air, it turns bright red, and they love to expose that, and that's when you buy. Now, sometimes, of course, when you cook it, it becomes grayish brown. But, let me see, do I have another, or did I remove it? Okay, I probably, but when the meat goes bad, it also turns grayish, brownish color. And that's when you should throw it away. But what's most attractive is the bright red pigment that UC states that everybody will buy. Did you have a question? No. Okay. Okay. This is, you need to know this. When we were at the meat factory, you see round stamps that goes that went from the top of the carcass all the way down in purple color. This particular round stamp. And this particular stamp designates the safety aspect, the wholesomeness of the carcass to the consumers. So the owner showed it to us. It's all purple stamps, all the way from the top of the carcass, all the way down to the legs. And this purple stamp looks like this. It's a round stamp, and it says, U.S. inspected and passed. And the establishment, that location, is number 38 that they approved. So this is the inspection stamp. The number is designated, of course, with a processing plant. So when we see that round stamp, we know that the meat is safe to eat and wholesome to eat. Okay. Without the round stamp, they should never buy it. Because federal laws require that the animal carcass, it's mandatory, the animal carcasses be inspected. Okay. When they inspect the meat, and if it's wholesome, the animal was not sick, the animal was not dead, the animal was healthy and live when they slaughter, okay, then they put that stamp all the way down as passing the inspection stamp. Let me see. On the other hand, so that's the inspection stamp is round versus now the grading stamp. These are the grading stamps. These are voluntary USDA stamps. These are done by the meat packer to sell to the consumers, to tell them what grade they have. Because this is USDA Prime, this is USDA Choice, USDA Select. Which one is better, Prime or Choice or this? Do you know? Prime goes to the most expensive restaurant. Okay. So the factors that are considered are color, grain, surface texture, and marbling. So this would sell at a highest price, and this is the lowest price. Because this is the lowest price, they often don't grade it. You wouldn't even know. No grade here, basically. Why should they put a grade? That's to show you low. So you either find USDA Choice, USDA Prime. USDA Prime, the restaurant will tell you all of our meats, or this piece of meat is USDA Prime to tell you that. Let me see. Maybe one more to finish. Okay. So USDA Prime, very tender, very juicy, very flavorful. Okay. And the largest degree of marbling. Excuse me. So we'll continue to finish up our meats and poultry and fish, hopefully next time.